That's the TR. So Major Thomas, one of the Intel OCTs for Optical Charlie. Been with MCTP since about 2019, so getting a little bit gray in here. But it's definitely one of the most fulfilling assignments I've had thus far. It is fun and interesting to see that as we're transitioning from COIN to LISCO, how the maneuver elements, how the Army divisions, brigades, etc., react and respond to those changes in warfare and how we plan to move forward with that. So next slide. Just a quick look at the references. The most exciting reference in the Army's arsenal is FM 2.0 intelligence. I mean that is pure facts. ATP 2TAC 01 collection management. UCM, one of the most important ones, or just the key takeaway from this is truly the MCTP key observations that we look at, because it shows systemic issues and or problems from the divisions, and it seems to be a recurring theme. But if you have to read at least one thing from what we have listed here, suggest you look at the key observations from MCTP. And then for that, it's not listed here, but for the Intel warfighters, definitely look at FM or TC 7-100, or for the Op 4, how they fight, go forward in battle. Next slide. All right, the agenda that I'll go through, this is a little bit different because, of course, you're not a training audience. I'm talking to fellow OCTs, so just keep that in mind. But we'll look at the problem sets that we see with the division training audiences, look at the function trends, and then the key takeaways. Next slide. All right, so intelligence problem set. So when we look at division training audiences and the challenges that they have, it starts during MDMP, and you're looking at IPB. So just area of operations, who can assist the two with defining the area of operations? This is a huge wiffle ball. Absolutely. You'll see, and Colonel Payne spoke of it earlier, when you look at the stovepiping of centers of excellence, unfortunately, you'll look at division organization, you're like, okay, they got it. They're going to share that information and talk amongst the warfighting functions. They don't do that, unfortunately, at times. So just looking at define the AO as an OC from C2, M2, etc., ensure that you're asking those questions. And, hey, how are you helping define the area of operations for this IPB? Because if you allow the two to do everything, he or she will, but you're not going to get that quality product that you typically would get if it's a staff effort. We know IPB is obviously a staff effort. The MCU, the two can do it, but who else on that division staff is probably useful at helping build the MCU?
Engineer.
You guys are great. You guys are great. Sometimes you don't get those answers from the training audience, but yeah, the Avenge, the engineers, they can help assist in doing it. They should assist in doing that.
Is that a trend you're seeing? I mean, area of operations is clearly in the threes realm. That's as a three, that's mine to define.
I've seen MCUs drawn where they're including some of the adjacent divisions battle space when they initially draw it. So you take a step back and like, well, why are they doing it? Because it's clear to define the three is doing that. They're publishing the requisite products. Sometimes they're seeing earlier orders and or fragmentary orders, and they're not updating their warfighting products to capture that key information. So that's why I just mentioned it, because it seems something so simple and rudimentary that we wouldn't forget to do that, but it does happen. That's why I mentioned to the OCs. So when you're looking at them build their products, you're asking those probing questions like, okay, what is this latest time information of value? Like, how accurate is this product that you're building your MCU off of? Because things change as the warfighter progresses. The threat overlay, the threat models, the two does that, but you look at the other warfighting functions. When you look at the enemy fire systems and the emplacement of those systems as you're just theoreticizing where these things are going to go, talk to your fires compatriots, your fires OCTs, and say, okay, that is probably a good location to template that enemy fire system. Or we wouldn't put that in the system, and from the blue side, that wouldn't be a place that we wouldn't place our cannon system. Red is going to have those same considerations to the TTPs as well. The sit temp and the vent temp. At the division level, you'll see in the vent temp build, when you start to kind of look at some of the downtrace units. I know we're talking divisions, but I'll mention some of the brigades. Those vent temps aren't built They're looking at the syntax almost as a SIGAG tracker. That's not what it's used for, and Colonel Payne just showed, a CPOP overlay where it's just a huge red mess. That doesn't help drive decisions. It doesn't tell anybody anything other than, yes, there are enemy forces north of, the line of departure. We get that, we understand that, but how are we defining that? How is that confirming or denying enemy courses of action through your event 10? And I'm just mentioning things that you have to think of as an OC when you're presented with these problem sets from the training audience, because they may or may not understand the importance of these documents and how they help the commander drive his decisions. And then on the right side of the slide, it's hard to see, sorry, it's easier on the laptop, a little bit easier, a lot easier on the laptop, hard to see up here, but looking at, once you have your IQB, how are we then going to leverage our intelligence assets to collect for that? So the right side is the collection management matrix. So step one, developing the requirement. Why do we want to collect on this asset? Probably because it's going to kill us, or it's going to affect our secondary and tertiary actions as we move forward with the battle. Developing the collection management plan, be proactive as you can instead of reactive. It's really painful when you look at a training audience and they're getting damage from enemy long-range fires, and they're waiting for the impacting rounds to hit them rather than being proactive and saying, okay, how can we kill this? We may not be able to engage it with our organic fires. We have our Air Force brothers and sisters that can help shape that part of the battlefield. So how are we leveraging them into the collection plan, not only to collect, but to kill as well? So just something to think about. Supporting tasking and directing. How are we going to task those assets? How are we going to direct them to collect for us? You have to be cognizant from the OC realm lens. Teach them how to ask for an effect rather than a specific platform. And you'll still see it at division level at times. Granted, they own the assets, but when they're thinking higher, sometimes they're still asking for, I want an F-18. Well, what's the effect that you want, not necessarily the platform? Because you'll see some of the down trace units, when they're setting those collection requests up, they're asking for specific division assets, and that collection manager can't slice that specific asset, they're denying it. But then you'll look at the collection template, you're like, well, hell, they could have collected on this, but they didn't ask for that effect, they just asked for a specific platform. So it's key as you're looking at the divisions fighting documents and how they're presenting things both up and or down, just teach, coach, and mentor on that specific, on the key ability to ensure that those down trace units are just asking for those effects. Allow the division staff, which are much larger, much more capable, should be at least, there's just sheer numbers, to get the desired effects that those down trace units want. And then you assess your collection. I'll talk about key enablers in a couple of slides, but far too often they're just looking at the grade. That's the sexiest thing in divisions are, so grade, and they want to use that for everything. But they're ignoring the maneuver elements that can collect BDA for them. So their pucksters, their work cell, etc. If you're not tasking those assets to at least do that for you, boys and girls running those platforms, they just don't know. Typically, they're just junior soldiers. They don't understand what they should or could be doing for you. So if you're not turning that little puckster switch on and tasking, okay, collect this, BDA for me, it's not going to do it. Real world, if I see an explosion, I should report on an explosion. In the war sim, if you're not telling it to report on that explosion and collect it, it's not going to collect it for you. So just things to consider from your OC lens as well. When you're hearing reports, you look at the God screen, B3D, if you guys have something similar for that, any way you guys are collecting data, you know what's going on in the fight, truly know what's going on, and it's not an analytical approach towards it. You can take that ammunition and not necessarily tell them what's going on directly, but just teach, coach, and mentor, hey, have you considered using this? Have you considered doing this? Hey, have you tasked these div end or div cav rather to actually collect for you? Oh, no, I didn't think of that. Yes, they are a collection asset for you. So every soldier is a sensor and shooter. It rings true in the war sim as well. All right, next slide. All right, so kind of looking at some of the trends. So we changed the terminology because it was really, really negative. Because this captured what organizations weren't doing. So we just changed it to at least capture and say, okay, Intel architecture. Successful G2 staffs establish and maintain their intelligence architecture. What we actually see is that they're not doing that. And this is for all of the trends that we're seeing here. It captures what they're not doing, but just positive reinforcement. We're trying to capture what they should be doing or what a successful staff would be doing to get those. So lack of thinking, enabler, inclusion, and assessment. So just kind of spoke about assessing and getting BDA, et cetera. They have challenges in realizing that the SPF is going to collect on you. But they see not a grade, but they'll see an enemy ISR asset, and that's the only thing that they assume is collecting on them. So if they look up and they don't see anything within the war zone, like, oh, we're good. Oh, these ground forces are still collecting on you. You have to consider that. You have to have a plan to kill them. That's something that they're just still challenging, because the division's mission is to shape the deep fight, not necessarily fight the post fight, but they still have a role in helping the subordinate units understand the situation around them, if that makes sense. Capture. So intel support to other warfighting functions. We talk about the stovepiping, I really will hit that again. IPB is typically done during the academics, and then it stops. Almost full stop at the onset of the warfighting commencing. There's been warfighters that I've OC'd and overseen where they're not even having touch points with the subordinate G2 sections. Like there's literally no G2 sync, startx to endx. And you're like, well, how are you capturing information from your adjacent units? How are you helping them confirm or deny how you see it versus how they see it? And then you'll go into a CARS and OC, and it's just, you're shocked and you feel really bad for some of these subordinate units, because they'll be pitching an enemy sit temp, event temp capability that completely is 180 from what division's doing, and that's fine to a certain extent, because the question will be asked, who did you talk to from division? And those brigade commanders are like, 2? Did you talk to anyone? No, I didn't. Why not? The meeting just doesn't exist. So you don't necessarily want to create meetings and additional requirements for them as an OC, but understand the importance of having those touch points and pulling data from subordinate locations and elements, pushing data down, ensuring you have at least a holistic picture. And if there are different site pictures from division and or brigade, they can articulate and explain it to their boss. If they're not at least having touch points, it's really hard to make sense of that trend.
Are these trends a result of a battle rhythm problem, a staffing problem, or kind of a combination of two?
A combination of both, sir. So they won't have enough staff members within G2s. Sometimes that G2 may or may not just trust their H chief or the assistant G2, et cetera, to run some of these meetings. They work ridiculously long hours. Say, hey, this is a marathon, not a sprint, but they're going 06 to 23, 0001 hours, bedding down for a couple of hours, getting woke up during the night. Their mind starts to shatter. And then they look at the requirements that they have from core to participate in those meetings as well. Sometimes they just don't have the bandwidth, or they're not willing to assume the risk and say, okay, subordinate member within my staff section, you got to take this meeting, you got to pull everyone together and make it happen. So it's problematic with both internal and then external factors as well.
Maybe answer my next question. Are divisions kind of looking at the intelligence preparation of the battlefield and going, that's a 2 issue and just push it over there? Or are they actually structured and kind of tying in the other members of the staff so that that is running in parallel or supporting the plans and targeting process?
Unfortunately, it depends upon that division and the G2. So if you have a G2 who's a little bit more stronger personality, is willing to say, hey, come on, let's get together, they'll make it happen. You have certain instances where the 2 is extremely talented individual, they're smart, they're capable, but a lot of us are introverts. We don't like to talk to anyone. We have our information, our data, we feel really great in our little TS skiff. We're like, okay, I have everything. You're not intentionally hoarding it, but that's just the personality that comes with some of the intelligence warfighters. I see you smirking, so you know it's true. So you guys know it's true. I'm an introvert. I have to be extroverted for this gig. But I have no problem also closing down and staying to myself. That's just the mentality of the intel corps, I guess. So yes, sir, it happens. I don't want to pretend or assume that no Army division actually has continuous IPB occur, but it is something that's challenging. Back.
Yeah, so a lot of problems, if you want to look and see where the problem is after the start, if you go to the 3, 5, and 5 meetings, when they're doing their OPTs, their operational planning teams, it's who is the two providing for that, and then within the group, how are the functional areas providing help and support. So is an ADA, systems master in there? Is the fires, I'm sorry, not nerds, but like the fires, people, the warrants, everybody that know what's going on, that maybe, where are they sitting? Are they sitting in the ACE, the counter fire element, or are they coming to the OPTs? And then what value are they bringing and how much input are they providing into it? Because, garbage input in, garbage input out. So if the functional elements aren't providing that input into the OPTs, then as we're forecasting what's happening, 96, 72, 48, and then happening right now, you don't get a good picture. We don't know exactly where, the ADA people aren't like, hey, I think this system is going to be co-located with this fire system at this point in time. And then that leads to, obviously a tightly wound NAI, TIIs, and everything else. So really, if you go to the OPTs and it's like one planner and maybe like people walking in and out, then you can pretty much tell where the problem is, sir.
So I won't completely geek out on this one because this is a breakout session, but I will at least let you know that Colonel Manor spoke about it earlier. I believe one of the gentlemen over here discussed some, just the challenge with the Combo 2 and 3 units and ensuring that their architecture is up to date, has the requisite security patches, changes, updates, etc. The Achilles heel within these warfighters is the intel architecture, because you'll have organizations show up and say, okay, we're using DSIGs at division, or we're using CPCE at division. Don Trace is saying, well, we don't have that. So how are we able to pull division products? I said, well, we can just share those efforts. We can create a shape file and share it with them. That's great until your TI goes down. How are you then? So how is the PACE plan built into it? So looking at Intel architecture, you'll see the blue box up the top of MCTP. Muse, if you hear Muse, that's going to be the FMV products, GMTI, etc. And then the WIN. Both go through either G2 or G6 as Trojan or McNay. Get fed to TCSP and CDSS. When I say those acronyms, do people know this what I'm talking about? Okay. So the challenge with this is training. Organizations, especially when you talk about the Combo 2 and 3, they don't have the training at times to truly be successful. And the first time that they're seeing these systems is a warfighter. During the CPXs, every time I teach an academic, I say, please, for the love of God, if you can, pull this damn thing out the shed, dust it off, ensure it works. If they actually do that and you hear that, hey, we use this during CPX 3, 99% of the time when that warfighter kicks off, that organization is damn near green across the board. The bubbles are level, they are good to go. If they do not do this, they do not use these systems, when the warfighter kicks off, they're lost in sauce and they're just struggling. They never use it. They don't have the training on it. Question?
Sir, is digital intelligence systems foundation course and the master gunner course, are they kind of rolled up in the mission command master gunner and digital master gunner courses? And if not, are they moment driven or?
I think I answered the
I can answer that. Chief Kaywood, I am Bismic. I'm an Digital Intel Systems Master Gunner. So no, they are not part of the Digital Systems Master Gunner course. FORSCOM just started acknowledging within the past 2 years DISMIC as something that the units need to have someone trained on. So your dismics are far and few in between. It's probably 200-300 of us on active duty, National Guard, reserve units, even less than that. So if I go to a unit and I say, do you have someone that's dismic? What's that? Are you sending someone to GAP? What's that? So no, they're not getting that. That training is not within the organization unless you have a tango that does that full time or someone that works in like system support. So getting it to this point, because someone mentioned earlier about the IAVAs and all that good stuff. Well, now for getting your D6 on a SIPR network, if it's not on a tactical network, that's additional authority use requirements that you have to have, and it's additional certifications you have to have. So if this happens well before CPX-1, that we're trying to get these systems up, because they have to go through all the additional paperwork to get there. And then if you're plugging into a hard line at an MCTP or at someone's installation, that's additional security patches that we have to go through. So I know everyone likes to say, oh, until the studs D6 doesn't work, there's a process to get it to work so that we can talk to our AFTAD, so that we can talk to our MDUs, so that we can talk to the CPOP or the CPCE. But it's not something that you start looking at CPX-1. It's something you start looking at the moment you know you have a mission.
Because I know typically the only time I ever see D6 actually in a full functionality is whenever I see tangos surrounded by FSRs.
Yes, because our tangos are not taught
Yeah.
D6 in the schoolhouse. Our tangos do not get that training until they get to the unit and then they go through that process.
Because I know as a systems warrant, like that's the one thing is,
You said this is going to be a breakout.
I'm sorry.
This is actually a good discussion, and ask you to kind of plumb that, both what Army's doing and with the 28, but there's going to be a breakout. Let's push that over to the breakout session.
I think you guys can teach a breakout, that's awesome. But I know these require money. Obviously, we'll dive deeper into this slide on the breakout, but just for general awareness, there's something called the GDP, the Gunner Entry Program, that is a $0 program. If you have, at least on level work, I'm assuming that it's on your mind, when you have that DISMIG, that Digital Intel Systems Master Gunner, they can give a course, at least they do at Leavenworth, the chief correct me if I'm wrong, but they give a course at Leavenworth, the GDP, the Gunner Entry Program, that at least gives like ground level understanding and situational awareness of this that will assist just from the OCT level when you go for the warfighter.
But for that breakout, I ask you if you guys can kind of talk through that and see what we need to do to train ourselves. I know, Chief, you're getting ready to move on to bigger and better things, so I'll lose you here shortly. But also, I want to know where 28th is at. I know they've been talking about this, at least to an extent, during the planning conferences leading up. But I don't know this well enough to get down to the level of detail to see if they're doing what they need to do to be postured for 1, 2, and 3.
I will end this geek session. Next slide, please. All right, so inclusion of enemy enablers in analysis. So we kind of touched upon this earlier. So when you're looking at IPB, continuous reverse IPB, reverse warfighting functions within IPB. As an OC, please drill your folks and just ask them, hey, when was the last time you got together with the two? Because this makes sense. Because if you allow your individuals to make, they're not making an enemy assessment per se, but they're making assessment their secondary and tertiary operations within their warfighting function. If they're talking to the two, that helps him or her understand some of the challenges that we have both on the blue side, but the challenges that may exist or should exist on the red side as well. So ensure that they are at least talking with each other. This looks at threat rings and threat circles on this slide. So if the two is just building this independently, it's probably going to be wrong. Unless they're prior, branch detail and they understand how guns work or something like that. But if they're including their warfighting function brothers and sisters in this analysis, you're going to get a whole lot better product that's going to be more meaningful, other than just a bunch of red enemy icons on the map. So does this tell a story? Is this something that is useful to the commander, to the staff as we move forward? I guess this would be a useful product. These threat capabilities, range circles, etc. So you're looking at air avenues of approach, ground avenues of approach, etc. If you take the enemy capabilities into effect, it's going to be a meaningful product. concerns on this slide? Okay, next slide. I'll ask, because I want to get into the IHL Intel handover. This is one thing it's in doctrine. And if our Intel senior mentor was here, this would be a 30-minute slide. I'll try to truncate it to about 5 or 10 minutes. But the Intel handover line typically is tied to the fire support coordination measures lines. It's not to say that's right, it's not to say that's wrong, but that's typically how divisions are doing this right now. But with the Intel handover line, they're struggling with actually making it a meaningful transition point for the division and for subordinate elements. So they'll look at this, the IHL, and they're typically putting it where the CFL is. And I just confirmed with Colonel Johnson earlier, I said, hey, so like the CFL, like who's firing north of that? Like it was pretty much, it's an area, and if I'm wrong with the definition, please correct me, sir. It's an area, you know, CFL, north of CFL, you can fire without coordination measures being applied unless you have restricted fire area or anything like that. Typically, who can range north of the CFL is the division. And a couple of kilometers north of that, brigade have the operational reach to actually have an impact on that area. But not, they can't really go too deep between the CFL and the FF or the FISL. If you're placing the IHL at the CFL, you're not really doing anything for the division, because when you're taking the intelligence data north of that line, what you're supposed to do at the IHL is take enemy capabilities, last known location, templated location of enemy assets, and it's supposed to be a proactive handover of collection data. It tends to be more reactive, where it's like, we've reached baseline goal, that's the IHL, you got it. And that's just the wrong way to do business, because they don't got it. They being some of the operational brigades that they're passing this to. When I OC, I always try to kind of tease it out and say, okay, have you considered placing the IHL a little bit further south? Have you considered tying it to a condition rather than a terrain feature? An objective, perhaps, north of objective Fox, southwest of objective Fox. Just things to consider when you talk about the IHL. It's, like I said, it's in doctrine, but it's gray. It's not really black and white. It's not clearly defined as to how we should treat it. So it's interesting for us from the Intel OCT perspective, when we look at divisions, how they're treating IHL, we're continuously gathering data from our warfighters and just seeing how the divisions could positively enact the IHL to have it truly be a force multiplier without it kind of taking time away from the actual warfighting capabilities. So you see the bottom left. It's more than just a designated coordinating line, but that's what they're doing with the IHL. And if they're doing that, you're not going to get a useful product from that. It has to be battle.
We're talking to hand over down to brigade assets, correct?
Yes, sir.
So wouldn't some of it be aligned with kind of what those brigade collection assets capabilities are in terms of this? I imagine it's going to be, you know, kind of a mixed bag depending on those collection assets and capabilities in terms of what those subordination ones have.
Yes, sir. I mean, you think of like the main effort, secondary effort, et cetera, with the brigades within the division hierarchy, when they use that rudimentary, hey, this is the IHL, north of this. Second brigade may be able to enact that, but first and third can't. So that's why I say like it's more of a conditions based, in my opinion, and I get it. It's defined as an intel handover line, but things that we, as a profession, need to consider when putting these together is looking at the limitations, capabilities of those subordinate units, and can they actually action those assets, enemy assets north of, east of, west of, et cetera.
The enemy doesn't care what our boundary lines are. I mean, yeah, that's when you cross division boundaries, you're in a brigade, then your FISL So, I mean, there's area of interest and, their operations and, I think we're good. I think this is a good breakout.
I agree, sir. And it's funny that you say that because at times it seems like they're the warfighter. They assume that the enemy has access to our graphics, our operation graphics, and they know what the coordinating lines and operation lines and what boundaries will be. It's not that case, but what we end up doing is showing our hands at times, and you'll notice a seam that does exist. And the enemy, he flies so much ISR, the op commander, that eventually you would think and assume like, dang, he does have access to their assets. He doesn't. He doesn't know the operation graphics, but we play our hands so strongly at times. It's like, okay, we play too hard. They understand where it is. So it's definitely a good discussion that we continue to have amongst the profession, not only as intelligence professionals, but Army professionals. Next slide. All right, looking at BDA. So the way the divisions conduct BDA right now, I kind of touched this a little bit earlier in the brief, is they're wholly reliant upon the eye in the sky. They're not really looking at ground maneuver elements that can conduct BDA for them as well. They're using a chat, all upper TI, vision BDA tracker, and then obviously the final assessment of the combat strength. BDA is touchy when things are damaged on the battlefield. They remain in place if they cannot move for up to 4 hours, and then they're kind of scuttled away, and an hour damaged or destroyed rather. That's some of the planning considerations that we at least teach coach mentor on. So if you're conducting a mission and you're trying to kill an enemy asset, remember, for an hour it's going to remain there. If it's destroyed, then it's gone. It will decay and go away on the battlefield. If you don't have your collection plan and your shooter sensor for that BDA assessment that you're trying to collect on linked together, knowing, okay, we're going to fire this mission at 1,200 hours, no later than 12:30, or if not concurrently at the same time, we need to have something to collect on that mission to confirm or deny if we killed that enemy asset, destroyed it, damaged it, whatever. They're waiting 2 hours, 2.5 hours to conduct the BDA. They're not getting a true sight picture of the waiting that long. So like the flash to bang that they're getting from the BDA, this isn't immediate enough that we require or request, at least from them. So it's just, it's TTPs, it's SOPs, and COIN you didn't necessarily need to conduct immediate BDA. They just didn't have the ability to deliver those assets away. In LISCO, you do, and it's just a change of mentality. We're getting better. The divisions are getting better since I started being in OCT a couple of years ago. So I won't pretend that it's a perpetual problem that is not improving, but it is something that we just see continuous challenges on because it is inherently difficult to look at a division's huge battle space. Fire mission over here, fire mission over here. How are we collating these assets to collect on and conduct the BDA for us? So it's a continuous challenge. They're getting better, but just something that you should look at from the OC lens. Any questions, comments, concerns with this one? Next slide. All right, so we'll kind of take a look at intel support to other warfighting functions as I kind of wrap this up. I've got about 20 minutes or so, so I'm not trying to be too quick, but I know you're probably hungry. So next slide. All right, intel support to protection. So any protection OCs in the room? No? All right, awesome. So from thinking of yourself perhaps participating in a warfighter or being an OC, is there anything that is missed on this that you think Intel should support, needs to support to ensure that protection has all required capability or knowledge rather of enemy abilities in the battlefield, or how can protection assist the two? So I mean, of course, like I have the first bullet, synchronize with disadvantage to receive counter mobility and put into ITV. So you'll have a 2 look at the wet gap crossing, and they were just templating where I think that enemy may be how are we at least confirming or denying that with the advantage to say, hey, I wouldn't put that there? And you're not going to be able to predict where the enemy should place those obstacles, but how is the intel support to protection enhancing or decaying your ability as protection?
So I think it starts with kind of what you highlighted, that reverse warfighting function, IPV, where we're red hatting and all those specialties inside the protection warfighting function, all of them looking at their specific capabilities, the enemy capabilities that are going to target us, and ensuring that we're properly templating those things, working with our intel planners to ensure that again, that stuff is all holistically represented so that, again, we've got a common picture across the board, and that the right people are looking at it. Again, the intel and the specific subject matter expert that has, grown up and studied those enemy capabilities, and then from an intel perspective, putting that together in a bigger, greater scheme of what is the enemy order of battle, how does that impact it, and how is that going to play out?
So you said enemy order of battle. Do you guys understand what that means? Okay, so, not to insult anything. So you look at the enemy, their hierarchy, how they plan to fight, and then having someone who understands the sustainment package will help the two in assisting you with providing that the intelligence support that you need to be successful in your mission. So, knowing the order of battle, are they going to place their heavy fuelers up front, in the middle, in the rear? As an intel guy, I don't know that. But when I talk to you and say, how can I assist you, and how can I better leverage collection assets to confirm or deny how the enemy should be projecting its force, sustaining its force, this is where that helps out. So, next slide.
So one thing I don't really see about a lot here, talking about enemy IAD capabilities, you're saying divisions tend to rely heavily on ISR for collection and PDA. Having a good understanding of threat IADs and emphasizing that to these guys will be important as well.
Yeah, and that's a challenge that we see. So divisions love, and I think just human nature, we love to collect on something that you can physically see. The muse you can see within the war sim. The other collection assets, it's a replicated or simulated siege. But there are other platforms, Secret, TS, etc., that can provide knowledge of the IAS network that can't necessarily see. They pick up a signature, and that's how they see through an electronic signature, not physically seeing through the video or through the eyeball. I'm trying to keep it as unclassed as possible, so you understand what I'm saying, but they have problems, they being divisions, in realizing that, okay, we have these assets that can collect on enemy IAS network. It's unfortunate when you watch them continuously fly into that IAS bubble, and either an Apache's getting shot down, or Chinook, or an ISR asset, you're like, okay, well, what else can we use to help us kind of confirm, deny the TAIS, there's another aviation asset that helps track. Was that? Amdu's fix it, yeah. So there are other assets that we have that can help us collect on those networks, but we're just not using it. It's a challenge, but if you know about it, it helps them teach, coach, and mentor. Hey, have you considered using this? If you don't know, it's a mere challenge. Next slide. All right, intel support to sustainment. It's really the same thing. So you'll just talk about the order of battle and how the sustainers are kind of projecting both blue forces and how the enemy should react to sustain its force as well.
I would argue, and I keep finding that they get so focused on enemy as the S2, as the expectation of the S2, when the S2 can provide so much more, the commander lets them know what they're looking for. So especially if this division is going in with a theater opening operation, the S2 can have to broaden their aperture. I need time vector for example, I need to know how deep ports are, roadway, how much weight can they hold, a whole different infrastructure type vision from them. And working with the DTO out of the G4, for example, it my mobility tech or that major knows what they're looking for, work with them too, to let them know, hey, here's some things you can ask, maybe not from the G2 in the division may not be looking at it, but the TSC's G2 is definitely looking at it, but helping that intel officer understand, hey, if you're stuck with the sustainment unit, because you're all fighting so hard to get out of it, instead of fighting to get out of it, let's learn what else you need to know to make a commitment to it.
Break this line. So it's working with internally assets that you do have, of course, including adjacent S2s, G2s, et cetera, that can help you assist in building this site picture for the sustainment plan. So it's, thank you, ma'am. It's key. Next slide. All right, intel support to fire. So this kind of buys into the shooter sensor linkage program. So being part of those targeted working groups, target decision boards, et cetera, that's where the two is probably going to spend a large majority of its time, rather, in helping to shape the battlefield and helping to identify and nominate targets with the fire section. Do you guys see that happening quite often? Is it a challenge that you've seen in your OC duties thus far? So we have the FAIO within the ACE. If they're in the ACE exclusively, they're not really value added, but if they work with the JAGIC, we've seen, divisions that have placed that FAIO within the JAGIC have had greater success in helping to kill the enemy because they're hearing what G2 was talking about. They know where the collection assets are. They know what the plan is. They can help the JAGIC understand, visualize the event tent, confirm or deny enemy location, courses of action, etc. When they do that, we're seeing greater success with how intel is supporting the fires through that FAIO typically. Next slide. All right, support to movement and maneuver. So, big one here is developing a separate IPD effort for the CAP. So, man, you kind of just talked about talking to the TSC for sustainment 2. Talking to that CAB S2 and understand, okay, we have our IPD focused mainly on route maneuverability, leveraging the CAB S2 to assist you in helping to identify, visualize the enemy's near threat, pays huge dividends. When we've seen organizations where the CAB S2, Division G2 talk quite often, when they're building the enemy air threat picture, it's more plentiful, more meaningful, more useful for that division because they're not operating in the back of what we discussed earlier. So the key takeaway of all these slides is just ensuring that you are actually talking to these warfighting functions, soliciting their feedback, incorporating it into your plan, and it's not just operating as a drafting as to. That's unfortunately what we see too often. Updating IPB when the new transitions to defense. It seems common sense, it doesn't happen though. So we're looking at an offensive-minded enemy, they transition to defense, and we kind of sit back and we scratch our head like, they're not moving. Like, what's wrong? Are our sensors broken? No, they're transitioning to defense. Like, what's the trigger for that? How are we then going to change our posture, our battle rhythm, our mission set to attack and kill the enemy when they're transitioning to defense? Sometimes you see blue forces do the same thing. They go into defense, we go into defense, and then that just is horrible for us because their fires, enemy fires, are typically far greater than ours range-wise. They just hammer us. And like, what are you doing to kill them? How are you transitioning to kill them while they're in a defensive posture? How are you maneuvering your forces? So that's the 3 recognizing it, the 2 recognizing it as well. Okay, how do we create a plan, a 4th plan to combat that? Next slide. All right, so intel support to C2. So development SOPs, you know, for the CPCE, so looking at this architecture and the Army's new toy, CPC, we're moving away from CPOP, the current man I alluded to earlier. Unfortunately, you'll see these organizations using CPC for the first time as a provider. So, how can two assist with that? Don't know. Like it's not that I don't know, but looking at some of the systems that the two is using, they're the D6 feeding into the Intel picture. How is that feeding into CPC? How are we pushing that down to the units across the division's architecture? Having the requisite training, knowing how to use that, and that's where it comes key. Having soldiers go to these courses, understand how to use the architecture and actually publish documents instantaneously or as required, and being proactive. So this is really just kind of buying into being a proactive, knowing that two shop, and knowing how to push those products through the system. So looking at collection management fees at the bottom, critical path of the meetings. Patriot in the back talking about garbage input, garbage output. Knowing what needs to be fed into these systems will help the two, help the division as a whole in actually getting a useful product out of that. So knowing the capability of the C2 systems that they're using, knowing how to publish those products, knowing how to build efforts, et cetera. And it just takes training, and it's fine when you notice this, but just teach Coach Mitchell and let them know, okay, have you gone to these foundational courses? Have you actually pulled the system out of the box and used it? If not, that's fine, but just knowing, okay, these courses exist for you to be successful. Next slide. All right, in closing, so some of the key takeaways. The Intel architecture, the two's got to own it. I get it, you're going to ride the S6 network, but you can't have that lame duck excuse, well, we didn't know that the patches weren't applied, we didn't know that it didn't work. You got to take it out of the box, you got to use it. And I get it, it's not really a useful project, it's not connected to SIPR, but spoke about earlier, it takes 2 or 3 days to download a patch during a drill weekend for a combo 2 to 3 unit. Actively, it works a little bit faster because you're just there all the time, you can do it. But just knowing that, hey, we have to pull these systems out and use them. And waiting until the moment you need it, it's far too late. You have to do it. You have to update the products when you don't need it. Analysis and inclusion of key enablers and assessments. Knowing that collecting is more than a grade. So it's just knowing that you can pull every soldier within that formation, every truck, asset that's out within the battlefield to pull that information for and including their spot reports into our assessments. It's a lot of data to pull. You can't pull every piece of equipment that's out there, of course, but just knowing that you have greater capability than the sexy eye in the sky. Plan, code, find, share the intelligence handover process for division. This is just a sixth point that we just got to continuously talk about. The IHL is it's an elephant in the room. We know it exists. We know that we have to share information, but we have to ensure that when we're sharing the intelligence information and the capabilities, et cetera, that we're sharing it to an element and or echelon that can actually action that. If they can't, then it's not really value added. And the last bullet. So this is the daily commander engagement with the G2 team and aids from the commander. It seems silly, but there's so much that's lost in translation when commander's guidance is given. It's not that the G2 needs to be hand-walked around division headquarters, but having that direct engagement when the commander actually comes into the ACE and or to the G2 office, section governor, and speaks with them. It gives clear, directive guidance. We're seeing from our lens as OCs a more productive and capable G2 section, just because the commander is truly buying into what they're doing. He's giving direct guidance to them, and they're able to build their products based upon what the commander's telling them he needs to collect on. next gentleman from that table.
I'll just say one thing. So what drives Intel? Operations. Okay? They have to have that focus. Otherwise, there's a mismatch. The G3 should always be with who? G2, right? Those two, they go talk to the commander, they go talk to the O, they go talk to somebody that go together, so they have a common picture and a common understanding. What we'll see is they'll both get back into their cylinders of excellence, right? And they'll both be managing their areas. They just really need to be together. Good units, from what we've seen, the G2 and the G3 are tied together in everything they're doing, and everything is synchronized with the staff. It makes the staff slightly easier.
Go get some lunch.
See, you're the hero.